What would you do if the person who saved your child's life turned out to be hiding a secret that could destroy everything you've built together? Alexander Hayes thought he knew Sarah Mitchell, the paramedic who pulled his daughter from twisted metal and blood on the Golden Gate Bridge. But when an anonymous caller whispers, "You don't know who she really is," Marcus discovers that love and trust can be as fragile as life itself. Sarah's past holds shadows darker than he imagined, and someone is determined to use them as weapons. Now Alexander must choose between the safety of his family and the woman who gave him a second chance at love, before the truth destroys them all. If powerful stories of love, loss, and redemption move you, hit that like button. It helps more people discover love stories worth telling. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you. And be sure to subscribe and ring that bell, because every story I share is chosen to make you feel something real. The first time Alexander Hayes saw her, there was blood on her hands. Not her own blood, his daughter's. It was a 7-car collision on the Golden Gate Bridge. Rain had turned the road into glass, and screams cut through the chaos of twisted metal and flashing lights. But through all the madness, there she was, kneeling on the wet concrete beside a little girl in a purple jacket. Jessie. His Jessie. Alexander had built a fortune in tech, survived hostile takeovers, and buried a wife. But nothing had ever paralyzed him like seeing his 8-year-old daughter trapped under an overturned SUV. The woman, this stranger, was speaking softly to Jessie, her hand steady as she pressed a torn piece of her own shirt against the bleeding wound on his daughter's arm. "I'm not leaving you, sweetheart. I promise. Just stay with me." She never looked up when Alexander rushed toward them, his security team shouting behind him. Her focus never wavered. Not when the paramedics arrived. Not when someone recognized him and tried to pull him away. Alexander knelt beside her. "I'm her father." Then she looked at him, and everything changed. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, tired, fierce, clear. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, her paramedic uniform stained with blood and rain. She didn't blink. "She's in shock. We need to keep her calm." For the first time in years, Alexander Hayes let someone else take control. At the hospital, hours crawled by. Surgery, IVs, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. But Jessie would live. "Your daughter's stable. She's going to be okay." Alexander broke down for the first time in a decade. In silence. In private. He found the paramedic the next morning. She was by the vending machine, arms crossed, dark circles under her eyes. Still in scrubs. "You stayed," he said. "I clocked out hours ago," she replied. "But I wasn't ready to leave." "Why?" "She reminds me of someone." Alexander offered his hand. "Alexander Hayes, I know who you are." Of course she did. Everyone did. Tech mogul, Fortune 500 CEO, widower, tragedy magnate. "And you are?" "Sarah Mitchell." No smile, just truth. Over the next few days, he kept seeing her. Not by design. At least not at first. She was always there, checking Jessie's chart, sitting by her bed when he had to take calls, reading children's books in a voice that made everything feel safe. Jessie adored her. And Sarah had this calmness. She didn't fuss or flatter. She didn't care that he was rich or broken or guarded. She spoke to him like a man, not a profile in a magazine. One night, while Jessie slept, he found Sarah in the hallway, drinking lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. "She trusts you," he said. Sarah shrugged. Kids know when someone means it. She never trusted anyone after her mother died. "Not even me." Sarah's expression softened. Grief rewires the heart. He watched her, wanting to ask what she meant. But she spoke first. "My brother died when I was 15, she said. "Drunk driver. I was in the car. Alexander stared at her, stunned. I lived. He didn't. You don't forget something like that. Silence stretched between them. I'd like to thank you properly, he said finally. Dinner. Or whatever you'd prefer. She shook her head. You don't have to. I want to. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. All right. The restaurant was private, quiet, and definitely too upscale for a first date. Not that she called it a date. She wore dark jeans and a white blouse. No jewelry. No heels. And somehow she looked more beautiful than ever. I don't usually do this, she said as they sat down. Have dinner? Let a man with a net worth in the billions sit across from me without running a background check first. He smiled. What's your gut say? That you're either really good at pretending to be human, or you actually are. That made him laugh. She smiled then. First time he'd seen it. They talked about childhood, about old music, about their shared hatred of small talk. He told her about Claire, his late wife. How she died suddenly. A heart attack that stopped everything before the ambulance even arrived. I never said goodbye, he said, voice low. Sarah looked down. That's the worst kind. I stopped believing in timing after that. And I stopped believing in second chances. They sat in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was understanding. By the end of the night, he walked her to her car. No kiss. No hands held. Just eyes meeting before parting. But something had shifted. The next day, Sarah didn't come by Jesse's room. Nor the day after. Alexander asked one of the nurses. She's on personal leave, the woman said. No details. He felt something twist in his chest. 3 days later, a letter was slipped under his door. No return address. Just his name, handwritten. He opened it. I didn't mean to get close. I didn't expect her to remind me so much of my brother. Or you to remind me of someone I once knew and swore I'd never miss. I care more than I should. That's why I'm leaving before I ruin something good again. Sarah. Alexander stood frozen, letter in hand, heartbeat roaring in his ears. She was gone, and he wasn't used to losing people who chose to leave. Especially not people who saw him. Not his name, not his power. Just him. Now he would have to decide whether to let her go quietly or fight for the woman who saved his daughter, and awaken something in him he thought had died. Alexander had never been the kind of man who chased things. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He built empires by outlasting people, not by pursuing them. But for the first time in years, he couldn't focus. Not in boardrooms. Not at charity galas. Not even in the quiet moments beside Jesse's hospital bed. Because Sarah was gone, and she'd left a hole in the air that no one else could fill. He reread her letter a dozen times, each line cutting deeper. The way she'd said, I care more than I should. The way she'd blamed herself for the very thing he wanted her to feel. He'd seen that look before. In the mirror after Claire died. That mix of guilt and grief and survival that no one else really understood, unless they'd worn it like a second skin. But this time, he wasn't going to let someone walk out of his life without a fight. He had her full name. He had resources. It didn't take long. Sarah Mitchell lived in a small apartment in Pacific Heights. She'd grown up in Oakland, worked in trauma units all over the country before returning home after her father's cancer diagnosis 2 years ago. He'd passed away 6 months later. No spouse, no children, no siblings. Alone. Always alone. Except now. Maybe she didn't have to be. She didn't answer the first time he knocked. Or the second. But on the third, the door opened just a crack. She didn't look surprised to see him. Only tired. You found me, she said quietly. You left me no choice. I warned you. I don't need protection from you, Sarah. I need the truth. She hesitated, then opened the door fully. No makeup. Sweatpants. Barefoot. still beautiful. He stepped inside. The apartment was small but lived in. Books everywhere. Medical journals too. A faded photo on the mantel showed her, and a young boy with identical smiles. Her brother. Alexander walked slowly to the couch, sat down, and waited. Sarah remained standing. "I didn't lie to you," she said. "But I didn't tell you everything either." "Then tell me now." She exhaled, sat across from him. "There was a man, 2 years ago. A police officer I met on a shift. I thought it was something real. But he had a habit of running when things got hard, and I had a habit of letting people in who always left. And he hurt you," Alexander said. Sarah looked at him. "No, I hurt myself. I built a story around someone who was never going to stay. And when he didn't, I told myself I was the problem." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You're not the problem. I believed I was. And then I met Jesse. And you. And suddenly I wanted something again. And that scared me more than anything else. Why? Because I didn't think I deserved another chance." He leaned forward. "Sarah, I've lost a wife. I've watched my daughter come within inches of death. I've signed contracts worth billions and felt nothing. And then you showed up with blood on your hands and steadier breath than anyone in that chaos. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I don't know how to be with someone like you," she said. "Then we'll learn together." She didn't speak. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Over the next weeks, things moved slowly. Sarah didn't move in, didn't quit her job. She kept her distance in ways she could control. But emotionally, the walls began to lower. Jesse visited her every week after her cast came off. They'd draw pictures, talk about books, watch cooking shows, and laugh at the accents. Once Jesse asked her, "Are you going to be my new mom?" Sarah had frozen, but Alexander had stepped in. "She's just someone who cares about you, Jesse. And that's a very special kind of person." That night, Sarah cried. Not because of what Jesse said, but because of what she wanted to say back. Then one morning, Alexander received a call from a blocked number. It was early. He was drinking coffee on the terrace. The sky was gray. He answered without thinking. A man's voice. "You don't know who she really is." Alexander's posture straightened instantly. "Who is this?" "Someone who's watched Sarah destroy more than one life. Ask her about Tommy. Ask her what happened in Phoenix." The line went dead. Alexander stood still for several minutes, phone still in hand, jaw clenched. He didn't want to believe it, but the name Tommy echoed like a ghost. That night, he didn't mention the call. He didn't confront her. He just watched her as she helped Jesse paint watercolor flowers on the kitchen table. He watched how gently she touched his daughter's hand, how she bit her lip when she concentrated, and still the name haunted him. Tommy. Phoenix. What happened? He couldn't ignore it. He had to know the truth, even if it shattered everything. The next morning, Alexander called his head of private security. He didn't like what he was about to do. It felt like betrayal, but the voice on the phone, the way Sarah flinched at the name Tommy when he quietly mentioned Phoenix in conversation, it was eating at him. He needed clarity, and Alexander Hayes didn't know how to function without answers. Within hours, he had the file. He read it in silence. Alone. Twice. Sarah Mitchell, licensed paramedic, relocated from Phoenix to San Francisco 3 years ago. Previously employed at Desert Medical Center. Resigned voluntarily. Unconfirmed internal report involving a patient named Thomas Rivera. Police officer. Admitted with critical injuries. Relationship with paramedic on file was labeled inappropriate by administration. Patient died during recovery. Family sued. Settlement sealed. No criminal charges. Reputation impacted. Relocation recommended. Alexander's heart sank. She hadn't lied, but she hadn't told the whole truth either. He thought of Jesse, of how fast he'd trusted Sarah, of how far he'd already let himself fall. That evening, he didn't call her, didn't text, didn't answer when she messaged to check on Jesse. He was trying to be rational, trying not to jump to conclusions. But in his world, facts always had weight, and hers suddenly didn't align. By the second night of silence, Sarah showed up at his penthouse. In the rain, no umbrella, no coat, just a hooded sweatshirt and eyes full of fury and heartbreak. "I know you know," she said when the door opened. He stood there, jaw tight, silent. "You had me followed." "No," he said. "I had you researched. After a man called me and told me you weren't who you claimed to be." Her shoulders slumped. "Tommy, so it's true?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't define me. Because it almost broke me. And because I wanted something in my life that wasn't tainted by that chapter." "Sarah, you had a relationship with a patient." "No," she said firmly. "I loved someone who was dying, who I'd known before the accident. And when he woke up in my unit, I tried to recuse myself from his case. They denied it. I made a mistake. I sat beside him too long. I held his hand when he had no family. I crossed lines that I now know I shouldn't have. But I didn't kill him. He died on your watch. And I've lived with that every day. Even though I did everything right medically. Even though he went septic and they never caught it in time. I wasn't his doctor, but I was there. And his family wanted someone to blame. And I didn't fight them. Why? Because I was guilty. Not of murder, but of letting myself get too close. Of not protecting myself professionally. And it cost me everything." Alexander exhaled, rubbing his face. "I don't know what to do with this." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then I'll make it easier." She turned to leave, but he stopped her. "I didn't say I want you to go." She looked back, soaked and shaking. "You didn't say you want me to stay either." He stepped forward. "I don't want to lose you, but I also can't ignore what this means." "I didn't ask you to," she whispered. "I just wanted you to hear it from me. Not a file." He let her go, and immediately hated himself for it. 2 weeks passed. Jesse kept asking when Sarah was coming back. Alexander didn't know what to say. He buried himself in work, tried to distract himself with meetings and mergers. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah in that doorway, drenched in rain, begging him not for forgiveness, but for understanding. Then one morning, a package arrived at his office. No note, no name. Inside was a folder. Photos of Claire, his late wife, holding hands with a man Alexander didn't recognize. Dates stamped 2 weeks before Claire's death. Attached was a letter. "You're not the only one who's ever been lied to. Claire wasn't who you thought either. But you loved her anyway. Now ask yourself why Sarah is being held to a higher standard than the dead." His hands trembled. He hadn't thought about Claire's last days in months. Hadn't wanted to revisit the rumors about her affair. About the strain they'd never addressed. About how maybe love wasn't as perfect as he once believed. He sat back in his chair, heart pounding. He'd judged Sarah by a moment. A chapter. A scar. But if someone had done that to him after Claire died, they would have missed everything else he'd become. That night, he went to her. Her building was dark. He knocked anyway. No answer. Then he noticed the light on in the apartment next door. An elderly woman peeked out. "Looking for Sarah?" "Yes." "She's not here." "Where is she?" "She left yesterday morning. Said she was going home." "Phoenix?" His blood ran cold. "Did she say why?" The woman shrugged. Said she had something to bury. Alexander didn't wait. He booked the jet that night. As the plane rose over the city, He clutched the folder in one hand and a photo of Sarah and Jesse in the other. He didn't know what he was going to say when he found her, but he knew this much. If he didn't try, if he didn't fight for her now, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Phoenix was hotter than he remembered. Alexander Hayes hadn't set foot in the desert city in nearly 5 years. Had no reason to. Until now. He stepped off the plane into blazing sun, pulling his jacket tighter as he climbed into the black sedan waiting on the tarmac. He had one address, pulled from a background report he never should have authorized, but now couldn't let go of. Sarah's childhood home. Her mother had died there. Her brother had grown up there. And somewhere in that house, he was sure, was the part of her story she never wanted him to see. The driver stopped in front of a small ranch-style home in Tempe. Brown stucco. Dead lawn. No car in the driveway. He hesitated for a long moment, then knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. After a minute, the door creaked open. Sarah stood there in a sweater 3 sizes too big, her hair pulled into a messy knot, eyes swollen from tears or sleep. He couldn't tell which. She stared at him like a ghost. "I thought I left you in San Francisco," she said softly. "I don't think I ever really let you go," he replied. She stepped aside without a word, and he entered. The house smelled like old books and dust. Her suitcase sat by the stairs. An open photo album rested on the coffee table. Her and her brother, side by side, identical smiles and wild eyes. He picked it up gently. "You still look like him." "I came to donate his things," Sarah said. "I kept saying I would, but I never did. And then, after you, I think I realized I couldn't start anything new until I closed this chapter." He nodded. They stood there in silence, the distance between them both unbearable and necessary. Finally, she looked up at him. "You came all this way to say what?" "That I was wrong," he said. She blinked slowly. "About me?" "About everything." He stepped closer. "I read the report. I saw the file. I believed the worst, because I was scared of what believing in you might mean. That I might lose again. That I might love again." Her eyes welled. "I never asked you to love me." "You didn't have to," he whispered. Another step. "I loved Claire. I still do. But she wasn't perfect, and neither am I. And maybe I thought that if I just froze my heart after she died, I wouldn't have to face that again." Sarah didn't move. He kept going. "I don't need perfect anymore. I need real. And real is messy. Real comes with a past. So does mine." He reached into his coat and handed her the folder. The one with the photos of Claire and the man no one ever named. She had secrets too. And I loved her anyway. Sarah held the folder like it was a live wire. "I'm not asking you to love me despite my past," she said, voice shaking. "I'm asking you not to use it as a weapon." "I won't," he said. "I'm scared, Alexander." "So am I." Another step. Then she dropped the folder on the table and threw her arms around his neck, and he caught her like he'd been waiting to. No words, no explanations, just gravity pulling 2 broken people back into something whole. That night, they lay side by side on the floor of her brother's childhood bedroom. They didn't talk about the hospital or the scandal or the phone call that had nearly torn them apart. They talked about Jessie, about painting her room yellow, about teaching her to bake cookies without burning the kitchen down, about what it would mean for Sarah to come back, not just to San Francisco, but to them. And she said yes, not in a movie moment, not with candles or violin swells, just simple. "I want to try." 3 weeks later, they were back in San Francisco. Jessie ran into Sarah's arms as soon as she saw her. "Don't go again," she whispered. "I'm not," Sarah said. "Not this time." Alexander watched from the hallway, heart full. He still had a long way to go. So did she. But they had something new now. Not promises. Not grand gestures, just truth and time. But then, just as peace seemed finally within reach, another letter arrived. No name, no return address. Just one line typed. You think her story is over. It's not. Inside the envelope was a photo. Sarah and another man. Not Tommy. Someone else. Holding her hand. Smiling. Dated 8 months earlier. Alexander froze. Because the man in the photo was someone he knew. Someone in his inner circle. And just like that, everything fractured again. Alexander stared at the photo, trying to make sense of it. Sarah, smiling. The man beside her, close, too close, was David Chun, his company's chief technology officer. A man Alexander had known for over a decade. Trusted, promoted, treated like family. The photo had been taken in Golden Gate Park 8 months earlier. David's hand was on the small of Sarah's back. Intimate, familiar, a betrayal or a setup. He wasn't sure which felt worse. He didn't show Sarah the picture. Not yet. Instead, he watched her. For days, he studied her. When she laughed with Jesse. When she brushed her fingers through his hair late at night. When she stood at the stove, humming some old song under her breath. She didn't seem guilty. But then, neither had Claire. He started digging quietly. David hadn't mentioned Sarah. Not once. But now Alexander looked closer at his calendar, his trips, his social events. He saw overlaps, gaps, excuses, meetings that didn't quite line up. Had it been before Sarah knew who Alexander really was? Or after? He needed to know. One night, while Sarah slept, he opened the drawer where she kept her journal. He didn't want to read it. But he did. The entries were raw, honest, painfully so. She wrote about Tommy, about the guilt, about Claire's death, how she'd researched it and felt some twisted connection. She wrote about Jesse and how the girl's laugh reminded her of her brothers. And she wrote about him, Alexander, how she was scared of him, drawn to him, how she wanted to be worthy of being loved by someone like him, but didn't know if she ever would be. But no mention of David. Not once. He put the journal back and sat in the dark, struggling to breathe. He confronted David the next morning at the office. Behind closed doors. What was your relationship with Sarah Mitchell? David blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? Don't lie. David sat slowly. We dated. Briefly. I met her at a hospital fundraiser. Didn't even know she was a paramedic at first. When was this? Last year. Before you ever met her. It didn't last. Alexander said nothing. David leaned forward. Look, I'm not proud of it. She ended things. Said she didn't want to be involved with anyone tied to your world. I respected that. And yet I find a photo of you two 8 months ago. Holding hands. David frowned. I don't know about any photo. Maybe someone's trying to stir. You didn't think it was worth mentioning? Because it didn't matter. She didn't love me, Alexander. Hell, I'm not sure she ever even liked me. But you? She looks at you like you hung the stars. Alexander didn't respond. Because part of him didn't want to believe it mattered. The other part, the broken, bruised, abandoned part, was already spiraling. After David left, he sat at his desk, staring at the city, knowing exactly what he had to do next. He showed her the photo that night. She was helping Jesse with homework when he pulled her aside. I need to ask you something, he said, trying to keep his voice even. She followed him into the living room, sensing the shift. He handed her the envelope. She opened it, looked at the picture, and froze. David Chun, he said. Her jaw tensed. This isn't what it looks like. I want to believe that. You already don't. Help me understand. Sarah's hands trembled. She set the photo down. I met him at a benefit. He told me he worked in tech. Not that he was your CTO. We had coffee. A few lunches. That's it. The photo was the last time I saw him. When I realized I couldn't keep pretending I didn't care about someone else. Me? She nodded. You. Even before I met you. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew how it would sound. How it would look. Like I had some plan. Like I was climbing. And you weren't. Her face hardened. If I was, I would have stayed with him. It would have been easier. Silence. Do you love me? He asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. Then why does this still feel like betrayal? Because you're still bleeding from wounds I didn't give you. That hit deep. He turned away, jaw clenched. I need time. Sarah nodded. No tears this time. No pleading. Take it. She packed a bag and left within the hour. Jesse didn't understand. Where's Sarah? She needed some time away, Alexander said carefully. Did she stop loving us? No, he whispered. Not even a little. 3 days passed. Then one morning, a new letter arrived. Same typewriter font. Same envelope style. But this one was short. Just 2 words. Check David. Alexander didn't hesitate. He called in every favor, pulled every string. What he found shattered everything. Bank transfers, a slush fund, a private investigator paid by David, hired to dig into Sarah's past and anonymously send photos, letters, and half-truths. He'd been playing both sides, feeding Alexander just enough poison to make Sarah look dangerous. And the why? Jealousy, envy, because David had wanted her and she'd chosen someone else. Because Alexander had everything and David had nothing but control. Not anymore. Alexander fired him within the hour, froze his shares, called the board, then got in his car. He had a woman to find, a woman who never should have had to explain herself again. He found her at her old apartment in Pacific Heights. This time, when she opened the door, she didn't look tired. She looked resigned. Don't say anything, he said. Just listen. She let him in. I know the truth now. I should have known it before. He stepped closer. You never lied to me. You just didn't get the chance to be trusted. Her eyes welled. It was David? He nodded. I'm so tired of being tested, she whispered. I know. And I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to pass anything to stay. She looked at him. I love you, he said. And if you still love me, I want to start over. For real. No ghosts. No files. Just us. Sarah stepped forward slowly. I don't want to be a chapter you regret. You're the only chapter one want to keep rereading. And then she kissed him, not like a woman returning to something, but like one who'd finally come home. The second time Sarah moved in, she didn't come with a suitcase. She came with a key, with her name on a lease, with a toothbrush in the holder next to his, with 3 framed pictures of her brother and a plant she named Oscar. And this time, it felt permanent. The media tried to spin their reunion as another headline. Tech mogul's woman returns after scandal. They didn't know the truth. They never did. But it didn't matter, because Sarah wasn't interested in being a story anymore. She just wanted a life. And for the first time, she had one. Jesse was the first to notice the ring. Sarah was pouring juice at breakfast when Jesse froze mid-sentence and pointed. Is that a real diamond? Sarah flushed. It's not big. It's huge. Alexander walked in behind them, smirking. I told her to pick anything she wanted. She picked the smallest one in the case. I didn't want a rock, Sarah said. I wanted something I could wear without feeling like it came with a security detail. Jesse squinted. Does this mean we're like a real family now? Alexander bent down and kissed the top of her head. We always were. The wedding was private. 10th guess. No press. No ball gown. Sarah wore a soft cream dress with sleeves that reminded her of her mother's. Alexander wore the same suit he'd worn when he gave his father's eulogy. They were married by a judge who cried quietly halfway through the vows. Sarah didn't read anything from paper. She just looked at him and said, "I used to think love was something other people survived. Not people like me. Not people with ghosts. But then I met you, and you didn't run. You stayed, even when I couldn't promise anything back. You gave me the kind of peace I didn't know I was allowed to feel." Alexander just said, "You gave me the second life I never believed in." They kissed. The world turned. But this time, it felt different. Because they were no longer surviving it. They were living it. 6 months later, Sarah got the letter. It was postmarked from a rehab center outside Sacramento. "David," the letter was short. "I was wrong. I hurt you because you were brave enough to leave. I'm trying to fix myself. Thank you for not becoming what they said you were. You were always more than that." She showed Alexander that night. He didn't say anything at first, just held her hand. "You were always more than that," he whispered. She nodded. "I know." Jesse grew taller. Sarah started writing. She published a memoir 2 years later under the title After the Storm. It opened with a single scene. The day she found Jesse bleeding on the bridge. The day everything began. They bought a lake house in Tahoe, had a boy they named Jake, taught Jesse to swim without floaties, learned to argue better, to forgive faster, to laugh harder. Alexander never fully stopped grieving Claire. Sarah never stopped missing her brother. But grief became part of the foundation, not a barrier. Love wasn't the absence of pain. It was the choice to build anyway. On their 5th anniversary, Alexander surprised her with a small ring box. Sarah opened it slowly. Inside was the original ring he proposed with, recast and repolished. But now engraved inside were 4 words. "You stayed. I healed." She looked up at him, overwhelmed, and for once had nothing clever to say. Just tears and a smile. They never got a fairy tale. What they got was better, real, hard, earned, and lasting. Because some love stories don't begin in candlelight. Some begin on pavement, in chaos, with blood on your hands, and someone who stays when everyone else runs.